Welcome to another Ocean Ideas Talk, brought to you by ocean lovers.
Look, Australia, we are, as it turns out, the biggest buyer of new clothing in the world. So ahead of the US, ahead of the UK, ahead of China. Per capita. Did I say per capita? I meant per capita. Yeah, I did mean per capita. So per capita. That's right, yeah. So that figure itself just blows my mind. We have an addiction to fast fashion. I mean, fast fashion is affordable. It's cheap. It suits our budgets. It kind of keeps us up with the fashions. It's convenient, it's everywhere, it's online, but it's pretty crap quality, let's face it, and it's also costing the planet and particularly our oceans, as we'll discuss today. We apparently, one estimate is that more than 200 tonnes of clothing end up in landfill each year in Australia, and 100,000 tonnes gets sent offshore and dumped elsewhere. So this is an enormous challenge for us, and we have 4 crusaders of sustainable fashion, each in quite a distinct way, so I can't wait to talk to. It's the biggest fails for environmentally by the fashion industry right now. Kit.
Okay.
That's it.
Hello. Okay. There are many. I think right now, specifically, the biggest fail is the lack of innovation and solutions to, and I know that you'll be talking about some of those solutions, to the polyester technical fibres that are in the fashion world and growing at a rapid rate. So we're going the wrong way in terms of fibre growth in the entire mix. The technical fibres, i.e. synthetic fossil fuel fashion, is growing at a much faster rate than the biological fibres, which is cotton, linen, hemp and silk. And it's purely, I think, because of the increase in pricing and cost of the biological fibres. They are going up in price higher than the prices of the technical fibres. So fashion designers and companies scrambling for margin are going with the cheaper option, which is actually far more expensive to the planet's resources, which we'll talk about why and how.
We don't factor those costs in, do we? Lisa Lake, how do you see the environmental fails of the fashion industry? And I guess you've been right there involved in the cut and thrust of trying to get the industry to be more sustainable for more than a decade now. So you've seen some interesting changes. Where are we at? What are the fundamental fails?
Thank you. The biggest thing I've noticed really is the sheer volume. I guess it's twofold. It's the volume of textiles and clothing that are being produced, and then it's that mix, using a cotton synthetic mix as kind of the standard go-to fiber in most of the garments that we find now. So instead of moving more towards what we know is more sustainable for the planet, for the oceans, using natural fibers, we're getting more and more, as Kit was explaining, more of these synthetics blended into the fibers, which causes issues down the chain when you get to recycling. But since I've been involved, I feel like we saw a little bit of like movement was happening. Kit was involved. There was a lot of things kind of happening. And then boom, Shein and Temu come in and they don't have to pay tariffs. And we just get an onslaught of cheap fashion in Australia that is really the cause of
those online companies that are just, the algorithms just thrust up their wares at us all the time on all the social media platforms, don't they? Just buy more of this cheap stuff.
Yeah, and it's gamified, so it's fun. It's meant to be fun. You get on the websites and it's like, oh, buy this and you can earn 10% off of your next purchase. And why don't you just buy 5 sizes because you don't know what size you are? And it's cheaper than buying one pair of decent pair of pants, for example. So they really have gotten into, they understand consumer marketing, they understand how people buy and shop, and they're taking advantage of us all.
Yeah, and I guess it's not just the fibres they're made of, is it, either, Lisa? It's the fact that those clothes don't last long. So people get, maybe 1 year, if that, couple of months of wear out of them, and the fibres pull apart, they get holes in them, they're just trash.
Yeah, they are... I mean, I don't know if it's still even this, but traditionally fast fashion was something designed for 10 wears or less. I'd say some of these garments are made for many fewer than 10 wears as well, and you'll feel it. You'll feel it from a distance. They look great. They look really cool. They look on trend, and then you touch them, and if you know anything about textiles, you just feel them and you go, oh, I don't want to wear that, and it will fall apart before you've had a chance to wear it 3 times.
And it's cheaper to throw away. This is the other problem than the post to send it back.
Yeah.
And it's also cheaper to throw away than get it mended with a repair. You know, people are forgetting how to mend as well and resew buttons on. So even if you send it to your local seamstress or whatever, it's cheaper to throw it away than it is to mend and repair it.
But I'm going to throw one in.
Matthew England.
Chris.
Chris, sorry. It's because of my last panel. Just forgive
I know.
me.
That's why I'm helping you.
Chris.
The bigger problem is it's a contaminant if we're going to recycle as well. So if we're going to mechanically recycle that garment, it's going to have shorter fibre and it may have an insuperior dye or an illegal dye or something like that. If we put that with really good cotton T-shirts that have been made from good fibre, it lowers the value, makes your quality less, makes that recycled product more likely to fall apart. So it's that added problem with having that poor quality garment in there as well.
Yeah, so I'll use the opportunity to come to you then. How do you see the big fashion fails right now in terms of sustainability and environmental impact?
So the biggest fashion fail we have with regards to sustainability is we just don't make anything where we use it. And this is not regardless just for Australia, it's the same for America, it's the same for Europe. So all these garments are being made in Asia and then we're shipping them to where they're being used. We've then got to ship them back to recycle them. And so that doesn't happen. They just end up in landfill or they end up being burnt for fuel because it's easier to do that. And so how we get out of that is, to me, a really, really important process going forward, because we have a plastic bottle. At least that plastic bottle can go back and be recycled in Australia and be remade into a plastic bottle again in Australia. Aluminium can, not quite as easy. We can recycle them, but we send them to Malaysia, I think it is, to melt them down to make the aluminium that comes back to Australia to make the new aluminium can. But at least we can do that. Textiles, it's not currently viable to do that, and that's what's stopping it.
And you're fundamentally hoping to change that and running a recycling facility or building one. We'll find out more about that. Danielle, Haj-Moussa, what about you from your perspective as someone working in the venture capital industry? What do you see as the headline failures?
Yeah, maybe it's not a failure, but perhaps a challenge. I think what everyone is pointing to here is that there's this exponential increase in consumption and volume of textiles that are being produced, which necessitates these processes that are very much emissions intensive. They create a significant amount of water pollution, but the reason why they exist and are only becoming worse is because consumption is increasing. And so even though we have innovations that are trying to change the way in which we create fibers, dye and process materials, recycle materials, ultimately they're trying to play catch up. They're trying to play catch up with the increase in demand and consumption, and the brands are just trying to maintain their costs. They're trying to keep the costs down because of where the consumption is heading. And so for those who are innovating, they want to get it out into a sort of a commercial factory, but they need to meet the cost demands. And so it's just this chicken and egg problem. What's going to change? What's going to be the point in which we actually pause? I think that's probably the biggest challenge.
Yeah, that's a very powerful point. And so, to you, Kit Willow, what were your ambitions when you were running your 2 labels? What were your sustainability ambitions, and what were the challenges in trying to realise them?
So I started Willow when I was 23, and I started with lingerie, and I started working with silk in lingerie and silk stretch. So that just inherently is a far more sustainable fibre than polyester and synthetic fibres. I was addressing sustainability because I've always been a nature lover and a conservationist of seas and trees and bees.
Pointing to a T-shirt for the radio audience. Save our seas.
Save our seas. And our bees and our trees, and they are all impacted by fashion. So I was addressing it from a packaging point of view. So looking at, wire coat hangers and biodegradable coat bags, which in turn break down into microplastics. But at the time, it was all that was about. I thought it was fantastic. No one, we didn't understand the circular journey and the impact. And also paper from responsible sources. So looking at it like that, and it wasn't until after 10 years of Willow, I met this incredible man called Johann Zeitz, who was the head of sustainability for the Hurren group, which have Gucci and Puma and Alexander McQueen, etc. And he also was the most successful CEO in history, youngest most successful CEO in history at Puma. And he invented the environmental P&L. So he had a financial P&L and an environmental P&L.
And for those who don't know what a P&L is.
So profit and loss. So, you've got your revenue and you've got your expenses, and at the end you've either got a profit or a loss. So in the environmental one, you've got your revenue, which is very little, and you've got great expenses. So it was about reducing the expense line in the environmental P&L.
So really looking at environmental costs, bringing that into the... Yeah, right.
Yes, and how you can give back and regenerate soil, therefore you're inputting more revenue into your environmental P&L.
This idea of natural capitalism, that in fact nature gives us a resource we take from nature, there's a cost involved.
50% of the world's GDP is reliant on a healthy natural system, and we forget without healthy trees, healthy bees and healthy seas, we have no economy. And soils. There is no fashion, there is no food. Food will obviously take over fibre in agriculture, but that was where I addressed it until Johann told me about the environmental P&L, and I said, what was the greatest expense in the environmental P&L? And he said the greatest expense comes from materials, about 75% year on year in the Puma P&L. It was materials, and I was like, how did I not know that? I've been addressing it from a sort of distribution, packaging point of view, not from a material point of view. Although I did use a lot of wool and natural fibres because they breathe better and they're more
beautiful.
But
they have a cost. Look at the cotton industry and its use of water.
Yes. So then it was just this massive light bulb moment, and that was the turn. And that was when KidX was born, and I started KidX with the sole purpose to maximise the win from everything you wear now comes from soil or oil. That's it, soil or oil. And it's the journey, the circular journey from that extraction or that growth, where every single decision that is made on that value chain has an impact on nature and on our health as well. So cotton, as you were just saying, it has requires a huge amount of water, but it also uses a lot of genetically modified cotton seeds and insecticides and pesticides, which lead to 20% of the world's water pollution, which then affect humans, our water supply, but also the workers working on the land. So KidX was created at the beginning with the sole purpose to maximise the win at every point of the value chain, so that planet wins, people win, the consumers win because they're getting something that's desirable and beautiful and not just a Hessian sack, because product at the end of the day has to be desirable, otherwise it won't sell, and it's counteractive on resources.
So the vision was there. How did the economics play out in the current marketplace?
And now that I'm stepping out of it,
thinking about what Danielle just talked about the actual reality of people trying to meet a market.
Yes, so without trying to turn anyone off creating sustainable fashion.
No, we're going to give you the good story today, don't you worry.
The good story or the real one?
No, I want the real one right now.
Yeah, okay. So the good story, I just do want to say, is that yes, you can create desirable fashion that consumers love. So in terms of sales and consumer uptake and sell-through, it was all there with KidX. And I have huge faith in the public and consumers in loving a piece if it's good or if it's bad. They know, when it fits well and it's the right design and it has a connection with the consumer, it will always do well. Plus the added value of it having a positive impact, storytelling and word of mouth. So that built up very quickly. So I was like, yes, I'm on the right, this is 100% the right path, and I'm going to, be able to. I started it with the sole mission as well of being able to create a movement in this industry to inspire others to start to do that. And I do feel that it whether it was the Zeitgeist at the time that did this, and it was probably time for this swing, but certainly once KidX started getting going, there was this kind
a whole lot of momentum
around sustainable fashion, which was fantastic. Reality is, so I was so pure about every single decision. The button, not plastic, Carozo nut. The care label, I mean, I don't know how many of you know what your care label feels like and what it's made out of. 99.9% of the care labels you have on your garments that you're wearing right now would be polyester. So they are often found in beach cleanups because they never break down. So I used organic cotton, no insecticides and pesticides used to farm the cotton. So it breaks down. So if it ends up in the ocean, it will degrade.
Over time.
Yeah, over time.
Yeah.
So every single decision. Now, every single decision that I was making, I didn't use any mixed fibres either because then for circularity. Yeah, I know you know. It was because then if it's mixed fibre as well, it's much harder, because that's another big problem in fashion is the lack of circularity.
Okay, so I'm coming back now.
It's linear.
So you were trying to be perfect in all the ways that you could, but the reality is that the marketplace isn't perfect.
The demand was there, the margin suffered.
Yeah.
So,
it was too expensive.
So at Willow, I know, I'll be completely honest, we had a 63% delivered margin at the end of every collection, and that's sale and wholesale and retail and everything. And at KidX, we were struggling to sort of get 42% margin washed up.
Yeah.
And you can't run a business on 42% margin. And so it was the margin and the cash that, that's just the reality. And I'm sure I could have done it in different ways that maybe would have worked.
Well, we'll drill into hopefully what could change that picture. Lisa Lake, you've been on a bit of a personal journey yourself because you were a hardcore fashionista. You would have probably bought quality fashion, but something shifted you to become an environmentalist and in this industry as an environmentalist. What was that? And then I want to drill in a bit more.
Truthfully, it was that movie. I mean, An Inconvenient Truth. Thank you, Al Gore. It really did genuinely make me rethink literally everything, starting with my job. I got into the fashion activism space almost by fluke, to be quite honest, because I wrote this book, Sustainability with Style. Probably the way I chose the title made people working in sustainable fashion go, oh, she knows what she's talking about. We should invite her along to kind of join our crew. So the book itself covered food, home, jobs, and shopping for fashion, which back then, I mean, it was like 2009 and 10 that I was writing it. So there wasn't much. It was secondhand fashion, or it was organic cotton T-shirts. So compared to then, things have opened up immensely. But because of that book, I met so many incredible sustainable fashion pioneers who had started the work that then I feel Kit amplified with her design. They'd been building their supply chains, from the ground up. It sounds so boring when you start talking about supply chains, but this is where the change happens, is at the farm and at the field. Mm-hmm. So I met these incredible innovators who were quietly doing the work, trying to get more attention. And something about the moment in time, I think, just clicked when enough of us got together in 2014 to do the first fashion show at Australian Fashion Week. And I tell you, it was not easy. It was a hard sell. We had to go in and pitch just like any other fashion brand would have to pitch their show to prove that we were not putting Hessian sacks on the runway, but to prove that this is fashion that we're talking about. So it was, as anybody who's put on a fashion show knows, it was incredibly hard work, incredibly stressful, incredibly expensive. But when you have that momentum of the kind of activist spirit saying, we know things can be better, we know they can be beautiful and done in a better way, somehow miraculously it came together. And that's when I really kind of fell into the power of storytelling that fashion enables when you are talking about the environment. It opens up new audiences, new people to engage with around these really important topics of climate, of ocean health, of biodiversity loss, because you can say, look, things have to change.
And you're wearing it on your body. I
You're
mean, there's
always
something
wearing it on
fundamentally
your body.
intimate
Yeah,
about that. It kind
yeah.
of when
Everybody
you hear that
wears
story,
clothes. Yeah.
you hear that sort of intimate story of how you moving through the world with the clothes that you wear connects inextricably to the rest of the planet, don't you? What do you mean? And then I'll come to you, Chris. What do you mean by a circular operation for the fashion industry? Just paint the picture of what that would look like to have a circular approach to manufacturing in this industry.
Sure. I'll start just by saying right now we have a very linear approach where we take something from the earth or, from fossil fuels or the soil, we create a fiber, we create a fabric, we create a garment gets worn, garment gets disposed of, thrown away, ends up in landfill. Maybe it gets reworn a few times by someone, but probably not, goes to landfill. So circular means we are literally closing the loop. So we'll create the fiber, you'll create a garment, wear it, love it, repair it, sell it, share it, rent it. When you're really at the end, it's been mended, it's not a viable option anymore, then it re-enters as a resource to create new fiber, to create a new material, to create new yarn. So we're really not sending anything back to landfill anywhere. It's going to stay in use. But the key thing when you talk about circularity is not to get too focused on the recyclability as like the saving grace.
Because that takes energy.
It takes
that
energy,
takes energy
it takes
and
resources. It's about
greenhouse
keeping
gases.
that garment at the highest, what we call, like, keep it at the highest level possible. So keep wearing it for as long as possible, repairing it as much as you can, knowing you still want to look great in your clothes. But yeah, keeping it up as many times as you can, and then recycle it.
So, Chris Hurren, take me into the world of recycling. So you're working on a whole lot of different frontiers, recycling of existing clothing, so the challenge of recycling textiles, let's come to that. You're also looking at engaging with people who are developing new types of textiles, so not polymers, using other materials, and also looking at different types of dyes and dyeing processes. Let's come to the challenge of recycling textiles. How hard is it and why?
So the biggest problem with recycling a textile is sorting it. Because if we look at everyone in the room here, we look at the different colours we've got in the room. If we're going to recycle those textiles, first of all, we have to sort them for colour, because we're going to want to retain that colour in the recycling process if we can. Second, we've got to sort them for fibre type. You look at the number of different fibre types that we would have in this room and the blends of fibre type. How many people are wearing a pure wool, or how many people are wearing a polyester cotton acrylic blend because someone thought that would be clever to do. The 100% wool might be easily recyclable, whereas that blend becomes a lot harder to recycle. So then it's the regimes of recycling. So first of all, don't recycle, reuse it. So the number of times you can get that to go around and around and be reused, or to be made robustly so it can be worn for a very long period of time, will reduce the energy of that garment. When it gets to its end of life, then it needs to be recycled. There's a number of different ways. The lowest energy version is to mechanically recycle it. So with a textile garment, that's pull it apart back into its individual fibres and put those individual fibres, possibly with some virgin fibres, and spin them back into a garment or into a yarn that can be then woven or knitted into a garment.
And hopefully using a seamless knitting machine, but we'll come to that.
Well, possibly a seamless knitting machine. It may be it could be woven, because you're not going to get a nice woven pants out of a seamless knitting machine, but it's using the right equipment to put it back in. Now, you can only do a couple of times with that, because every time you mechanically recycle, you reduce the fibre length, and eventually it'll get to a point where you can't mechanically recycle it. Other ways of doing it is to with polyester is to melt recycle it. They still call that mechanically recycling, but you take your polyester shirt, you melt it down back into a polyester chip, and then you extrude it again into a fibre. and go through that chain again. Now again, that suffers because every time you do that, you reduce the polymer, and eventually you'll get to a point where you can't do it anymore. The next method is to chemically recycle, and one of the companies I'm working with that Danielle is connected with is Samsara Eco, and they are able to use naturally occurring enzymes to break down plastics. So they will digest the plastic, the polyester or the nylon at the end of its life. It will turn it back into the monomers again that can then be turned back into the original polymer. Now the beauty of that is...
So these are the sort of short chains.
Yeah, the little tiny bits.
Of carbon atoms, and then you want to combine them into a polymer, long chains of carbon atoms.
And the beauty of doing this is by going all the way back into its little individual bits and then remaking it again into a new polymer, is you get a virgin material. So it means that it has all the properties of the original material. But it's more energy consuming to do this because you've got to break it down and then you've got to do it again. But this is a part of the recycling chain.
So is that happening now anywhere? Is anyone doing that successfully and at scale?
There's a number of companies that are scaling quite rapidly, and Samsara Eco is an example. They're scaling at the moment on the New South Wales-Canberra border. I think they're about 2 months off moving into their new building with quite a large machine. There is mechanical textile recycling has been happening in the world for about 200 years. The technology exists now. The reason we don't do it is it costs too much.
Right. Before I come to you, Danielle, I also want to just look at you, Chris, new fibres, because that's a whole other frontier as well, isn't it? Like using seaweed, for example, and other biodegradable substances or materials to build fibre.
So I always look at the scale of the problem. So if we look at textiles, how much wool is used in the world, do we know? Anyone know the percentage of wool makes in textiles? 1%. So wool's never going to replace the world. Even if we grew 4 times the amount of wool in Australia, we'd probably get wool up to 3% of the world textiles.
And wool comes with its own problems. I mean, you've got sheep on the land, all the things, methane.
So you've got to look at where your problems are. And your problems are with polyester and with cotton, because if we look, 65 to 70% of the world textile is polyester, and then 25% is cotton. All the other fibres are 5% or less. So you're really looking at those two big ones. Polyester is totally derived from oil. So if we get rid of polyester tomorrow, what are we going to replace it with? So one of the options is recycled fibres, where we bring them back again. The other one is what new fibre sources. And it's getting fibre sources that don't displace food. So if we look, polylactic acid is a really commonly known biodegradable polymer. It comes from corn. It comes from cornstarch. So if you're getting polylactic acid, you're displacing food from someone to make that polylactic acid. Ulu, the company that I'm doing a lot of research with, they make their fibre from seaweed. And the beauty of seaweed is it's not coming from somewhere where you're growing food. It's coming from a section of the ocean. Seaweed is a natural scavenger. It grows really, really prolifically where our rivers go out to sea, containing all of our excrement that we put out into the water system. So they actually naturally clean the water. And so by able to use that seaweed, you're getting a material that's not displacing food. And in their case, they've done all of the energy balances to show that they've actually got a positive carbon input as well, because they're taking carbon out of the atmosphere and they're taking all those nitrogens out of the sea.
What's the fibre like?
We're getting there. So it is really starting to get quite exciting. We're almost at the point of making some first garments out of it. It will take a little bit, but it's feeling like a traditional fibre now, and it's getting strengths like a traditional fibre. Everything takes time when you're doing research. So we need to look at where we are. Now, I was going to bring some with me so that people could see it.
Yeah, because I'm thinking, okay, so how would that work with being repeatedly washed, for example? Or...
No, so it behaves like a normal fibre.
Gotcha.
So if you look, polylactic acid, which is that benchmark of biodegradable fibres, so-called biodegradable materials, it's very similar to what that would be at the moment. The only difference is the product that Ulu are working with is actually a naturally occurring polymer. What they do is they take their seaweed, they cook it to extract the sugars, and then they ferment those sugars with a natural saltwater bug. And that saltwater bug, essentially the easiest way of understanding of it, the bug's fat is the polymer. So at the end of the day, they get that fat out of the bug, and that is their polymer. It's a naturally occurring polymer. It's not something that we've made from cornstarch. So when we put that into the ocean, it will break down like a naturally occurring material. If it gets into the soil, if we were to sweep up the floor in here, there's fibres everywhere from our clothing. It's always escaping from us wherever we are, in our washing machine, when we're swimming,
into our seas, that's right.
So the beauty of that particular polymer is when it gets out, it will break down. And so it's how do we go forward? And if you look, you've got the likes of cotton. Yes, it has its water and its pesticides, but the right organically grown cotton means that when it escapes, hopefully it is going to break down, as long as it's not dyed with a bad dye.
I was just going to say, and then what about the dyes? Let me come to Danielle Haj-Moussa. So you're involved with some of the companies that Chris is also involved with. How do you see then the challenge of scaling up some of those technologies? If they become sure and ready and feel like a confident bet, what's the challenge then for a startup in this industry?
Where do I begin? So yes, we've interacted with and invested in a number of the companies that Chris described. So Ulu, Samsara, and in fact, maybe I'll just give a quick overview of our what we've called our fashion collective portfolio.
Because there's some cool stuff, really
awesome.
Great leather replacement by the looks.
Yeah, and I can also touch on the dyeing piece as well. And then I'll get into some of the challenges that we're seeing in these companies, and in fact, why the fashion collective came to be. It's largely because of these challenges. The way I got started in this space was I was looking at a company called Zefco, based over at Deakin actually, and they were trying to create a whole new process for how materials are dyed and processed, because in fact 90% of emissions in the sort of end-to-end supply chain of textiles you can find sort of the root cause in the dyeing and processing stage of fibre production. And so we were super interested in Zefco, and incidentally we had a number of our companies who were starting to recognize that their technology had applicability in the context of the textiles world. So Ulu initially were creating their PHAs to create plastic alternatives, and were starting to realize that actually it can be extruded and woven and turned into a material and a replacement for textiles. And I actually was at the Deakin labs when it was sort of being woven for the first time. They were trying to sort of test out that thesis. And Samsara, who initially were trying to enzymatically recycle plastics, realized also that the textiles problem is massive, and that it was pertinent that they looked into this opportunity. And now they have massive offtake agreements with the likes of Lululemon, and are really supercharging their focus in this area.
So what do you mean by an offtake agreement?
So this is if things go right with the technology, and they can sort of create the scale manufacturing plant to intake these massive volumes, then Lululemon is effectively guaranteeing them a massive portion of sort of their textiles to be recycled through the Samsara methodology.
So textile offcuts of their manufacturing processes, but would they also have a take-back scheme? Because that's when circularity really comes into its own, isn't it?
Yeah, so they've
and the
also put a
manufacturers
price on
take
it.
responsibility for the end life of those products.
Yeah, so in addition to them actually committing to being part of that circularity, they're also putting money on the table as well, which is really important. And I'll get to that in a second when we talk about the challenges. And so it was at this point where we invested in Zefco because we were incredibly excited about the opportunity, because textiles is a massive problem, where some of our companies were also transitioning to focus on textiles as well. And from there, we made some additional investments. So for example, we invested in Alt Leather, who are trying to do I guess alternative leather. It's a very sort of descriptive name, which is great, because the thing about the textiles world is that different textiles are used for different purposes because of their properties. And so if you want to address this problem, you actually need to understand why do certain textiles exist, and how can we replicate their properties to enable sustainable textiles at scale.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge, isn't it? Because there are reasons to use certain fabrics because of the manufacturing possibilities, but also the feel, the texture
Properties
on our
are so
skin.
important.
Although I think we've sort of thrown out feel with polyester.
Yeah,
there would have been a
that's
time
true.
where we wouldn't have worn polyester, but it's everywhere now.
Exactly. And textiles aren't just in sort of the world of fashion. The automotive industry uses a massive amount of leather, for example. So how can we make sure that when we think about sustainability and circularity, we're sort of understanding the whole ambit of materials that are in use and the different properties that are effectively encouraging us to use those types of materials. And then we also invested in New Era, who are doing bio-based dyes, because we are using these dyes that are carcinogenic and terrible for the environment, because when we're processing and dyeing materials, there's an excess amount of wastewater such that 20% of global wastewater can be linked back to the textile processing stage of textile development. And so we sort of ended up with this portfolio where we've effectively invested all across the supply chain. So starting from fibers fabrication to dyeing and processing, all the way back to enzymatic recycling, which, as Chris described, is one of the various ways in which you can actually recycle textiles. And that's when we sort of reflected and realized, okay, so we have a number of companies trying to solve different pieces of the problem. And I will say that these aren't just the companies who will solve the problem. It's such a massive industry, such that we need everyone to be successful. And we just happen to be investing in these Australian companies who have found a certain innovative solution to address these different parts of the supply chain. And so we sort of look back and realize, okay, awesome. So we have this portfolio that sits across circular fashion. What can we do to enable them to actually make sizable impact? Because obviously that's important if we want to solve the problem. And of course, back with the venture capital hat, we need them to be successful so that we can make our investors happy. And that's when the Fashion Collective came to be. We wanted to connect the dots between these companies to encourage collaboration between them, but also share those key industry insights that often take months or years to obtain when you're an early stage startup that's just trying to penetrate a whole new market. And so what are those challenges that we're trying to help them overcome? Well, first of all, it's not easy to talk to a brand and talk to the right person in the brand, get buy-in, engage with their innovation cycles to the point in which they actually are paying for your solution, but also integrating your solution for the long term. That's not an easy process, and these companies are still figuring it out. We have awesome companies like Samsara who have these major offtake agreements with companies who have a sustainability plan. But there are companies that are still in the very early stages of their engagement. So what does it mean to engage with brands and to do so in a way where you're not running out of money in the process because you're an early stage startup? This leads to the second challenge, running out of money, right? So we have these startups where venture capital can sort of lean in and invest. There's a lot of non-dilutive funding. There's debt financing, project financing, but this is an expensive challenge, and often that's not enough. So one of the challenges is funding these companies so that they can actually cross this chasm to the point in which they can actually be commercially viable solutions. So it's one thing being a company that has a solution that works in the lab, or maybe works in a big vat, or maybe works in a big manufacturing floor, but it's another thing being a solution that actually has commercial viability because it works at scale and it has the correct cost parity to integrate with these brands and these mills. That's an entirely sort of different challenge, and it's one that just requires funding. So we can sort of come in the early stages and provide that early stage funding, but what's sort of going to be their long-term funding journey? And that's one of the challenges that we're helping these companies work through.
Fantastic. What a great arc of a story that you shared there too. And this is where then there's a bigger story here, and this is an industry-wide thing. You can have individual innovators, but you've got these sort of megapolies of companies, massive chains, all connected, multiple brands under the one company. Then you've got the nature of the fashion industry and its workforce, that decoupling of the workforce from the consumer. So there's that lack of a relationship, isn't there? There's a massive industry and it's been globalised in the recent decades. So Lisa Lake, I'm interested in your impression of what levers need to be pulled to really make sustainability a going concern. Is it about, and I'll be interested in all your impressions of this, is it about government? Given that this is a globalised industry, is it about global agreements, a UN type agreement around the fashion industry?
Just a little question.
Yeah, just a little one. It seems to be key, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, it is. I mean, in Australia, we import at least 97% of all the clothing that we're wearing is imported from somewhere else. So I have long been of the opinion that there does need to be more government involvement in what is coming onto our shores. Australia, if we're just thinking about the toxicity of materials, Australia lets in materials that other countries wouldn't even let in, that the EU has stronger kind of barriers against. So there's some very basic health and safety regulations that could actually then have a bit of a roll-on effect in terms of sustainability benefits.
Could there be a unified approach to those regulations across the world?
Yeah, absolutely. And because the EU has a whole raft of regulations coming in place kind of starting last year, moving ahead over the next number of years, I have not seen the Australian fashion industry move so quickly as when they saw that these regulations were coming in place, as well as in the US with the Uyghur Forced Labor Act. Whatever the official title is, but which will probably
just
be
explain what you're talking about.
So that
there.
is there's a region in northern China where there is forced labor, the Uyghur region in the Xinjiang region, and 50% of the world's cotton is processed in this region of northern China. The U.S. a number of years ago has said we will not allow any materials that have been through that region come into the United States. So if you are a fashion brand that creates cotton clothing, like this beautiful organic cotton t-shirt, if you want to sell your garments in the US, you need to provide the full transparent supply chain saying, I know exactly where my cotton has come from and I can assure you it did not go through the Uyghur region. The Xinjiang region of northern China.
Although that might change under the current leadership because they're basically dismantling all regulation, it would seem.
Perhaps.
But that's another story.
But he's also so anti-China that he might leave that in effect, potentially. But I really didn't see as much kind of movement in the industry as I did when that was coming into effect, because it affected nearly every Australian brand selling into the US, which is a highly lucrative market. So I'd say, there's a number of regulations that certainly could help.
How are you working? Because this is also about building a different kind of fashion industry, isn't it, Lisa?
Yeah.
You are working to raise awareness, to train up the next generation of fashion industry creatives, aren't you?
Yeah, so the Centre of Excellence was really founded to upskill the current industry. So it was partially, we've created a number of short courses for people working in industry. This is a partnership with UTS and TAFE so that we can get everybody up to this kind of base level knowledge of understanding of what the key issues are, what the key solutions are, what are the innovations they need to be looking out for down the line. So we're training the current industry as well as having an influence on the up-and-coming designers coming through both of those institutions at UTS and at TAFE. And it's really, as far as I'm concerned, anybody graduating with a fashion degree now needs to be designing and planning their work for the future. It can't be based on the old ways of creating your tech pack and sending it out to say, here, this is what I want made. Send it back to me however you can.
But students leave starry-eyed and then they hit the reality of the industry.
Absolutely. That's so true. And if it's just like any other industry, if the leader of that organization does not believe in sustainability or in circularity, they're not going to get very far. And I have
or they're not regulated in a way that requires them to honour sustainability as a mission.
Absolutely. And we're seeing the kind of first hint of regulation in Australia with the introduction of Seamless, which is the National Clothing Product Stewardship Scheme. That is not regulated now, but we all anticipate it will be regulated in the future.
And what is it?
Basically,
what is Seamless?
Seamless is, if you're a member of Seamless, and hopefully it will be every brand in coming years, you will pay a levy per garment that you place on the market. So right now it's a 4-cent levy per garment you put for sale in Australia. It's voluntary right now, so brands are coming on board. You can imagine many of them are the early adopters anyway, but there are some large players involved.
What's the use of a voluntary levy? What is the use of a voluntary levy? In France, that levy is not 4 cents, it's $16. And isn't it $16 an item?
Well, they've proposed $16 Australian an item in France as a fast fashion levy.
Somewhat more than 4 cents. And then the question is,
Yeah.
what would that levy money be used to fund?
Yeah, and they're very clear. Seamless is very clear on what this pool of money. The modeling they did was based on 60% of the industry paying into the fund, and it would have a certain percentage for investing in sorting and recycling. A very large percentage is towards infrastructure and training around that. Another portion is R&D. So again, to get these innovations, we need more innovations. These are incredible projects that they're working on, and we need more. And then there'd be a lot of kind of advertising, consumer advertising, to talk about what changes are required. So they've been very clear with what the money would go towards. Right now, they're not at the 60% of market volume. The CEO of Seamless will regularly talk about how it does need to be regulated in the future. Our government seems very hesitant to regulate anything at the moment, and so it's this very interesting dance of whether or when it will be regulated. A lot of the big players won't participate until it is.
And that's the key. Big players want clarity, and legislation gives clarity. You could argue.
Particularly when you are a big player and you see Shein and Temu being able to put anything they want on the market, and they don't have to pay anything, so why would I pay to process their waste? So that's a snapshot of the debate.
And this is the challenge universally. Kit, how are you hearing this conversation, Kit Willow, in terms of what do you think would drive change at that high level?
I think
and help consumers make good choices. That's the challenge.
Well, that's what I'm doing.
Yeah.
So what Europe are doing, and France has introduced a digital product passport, which DPP, for all fashion brands by 2028 need to measure and disclose the CO2 emissions and the water impact, soil impact by SKU, so every single style that they're creating, they need to measure that garment's impact from its entire, extraction from oil or soil, all the way through to then, once the consumer purchases it, it's harder, obviously, to measure. But that is going to be introduced into 2028. I hope it is not reversed. It's phenomenal, and it's so thorough. So then that gives consumers the transparency to be able to see what they are purchasing, because right now no one knows. And the problem has been in this entire sort of movement towards more sustainable fashion, equally there's been a huge amount of greenwashing. So consumers have lost trust in what they're being told. Oh, this is sustainable. But is it sustainable? Because everyone's greenwashing, and what does sustainable mean? Or this is carbon neutral, and they're like, so carbon neutral?
There's no unified agreement or stipulation.
Well, yes, and also then what happened is because it's now illegal to basically greenwash, we've gone from greenwashing to green hushing. So now brands aren't talking about it because they're too scared to. So, and this is fashion, right? And there are apps, I don't know if any of you know an app called Yuki. It was started in France, and you can scan a barcode and you can see exactly what's for food and for skincare, and you can see what's in it and if it's good or if it's bad rating-wise for health, right? So 2028 in Europe, that is where we're going with fashion. We will be able to see per SKU that garment in its journey, how it's impacted.
What do you mean by per SKU for people who aren't in the biz?
So like this T-shirt is, SS 15T156. So it's that style.
Yeah,
It's
okay.
a cut. So every garment that you're wearing is part of a larger collection. So
Called a
it's
SKU.
that particular SKU. Sorry.
So you're also working on this front and using tech. You're building a platform, or you're involved in a team that's building a platform called...
Yeah, building a platform on my own. But
pulling in the AI for good, because AI isn't all just for stealing authors' books, as we've discovered in Australia this week. Most authors that I know have had all their content stolen by Meta. But what are you doing with Cirkit? CIRKIT.
Yes. Okay. So Circuit, I haven't sort of publicly come out with what
Are you
I'm
allowed
doing.
to? Are you prepared to?
Well,
A little bit?
I'm allowed, but I'll touch on it
Just a
because it is
smidge.
quite. It's very relevant to what we're
just in the
discussing.
couple of minutes that we've got.
It's like the circular kit, and circularity at the end of the day that's the measure of how that material and every single thing that's gone into it has travelled from soil or oil extraction all the way to end of life. And so it is a platform that I would love all of you to subscribe to and join because then it gives you a directory into brands in the home, replenishable home at the moment, and fashion space that do not kill bees, do not chop trees, and do not pollute seas, and can be recycled, reused, or composted at the end of their life. And so there's a tech platform in Europe, and so we are partnering with them, and they are using AI to measure. They are also a tech platform that is heavily involved in the digital product passport measure per SKU. So they've got 35 life cycle assessment scientists full-time working on value chain impact. And that's all being input into AI, and then plus using what is available in AI with recycling facilities and the chemicals that go into things. So directory, you go there. If you don't want to kill bees, chop trees or pollute seas, you'll be able to see brands that have been certified by Circuit to have the minimal impact on nature in its supply chain
So this
journey.
is about empowering consumers.
It's about empowering...
Who have got very used to cheap, fast fashion, though, and that's the challenge. But also the nature of fashion itself, this idea that we have to be constantly consuming new clothes and they've got to look different and they've got to fit with the fashion trends of the year. Danielle, you're itching to say something, I think.
When we talk to companies and we ask them, well, why would a mill or a brand buy into this? Why? Right? They have these processes that are cheap. They work. It means that they can actually respond to these ever decreasing fashion cycles. And the thesis is that consumers are starting to care more. And when consumers care more, coupled with the changing regulatory landscape, like what we're seeing in the EU, brands will start to care more and hopefully have, an increase understanding that sustainability is important and good, and also will equal dollars in the pockets for them. And then brands have an influence on the processes that mills use. And so that's the working theory here. And it's good to see that you're putting out a solution to the world that's trying to trigger that domino effect of, consumer information and knowledge sharing, because that's really important to get buy-in ultimately from the people who have decision-making power, who are driven by where the consumer is going.
Well, 35% of Shein customers consider themselves environmentally friendly, so that's very interesting. And I really think that there is definitely a desire for consumer. Like, it's like, okay, so do you want the T-shirt that kills dolphins, or dolphin and friendly,
Or uses indentured labour?
Yeah.
People.
Or the T-shirt that kills bees, or do you want the T-shirt that protects bees and flowers and biodiversity and doesn't kill dolphins? Which one would you like to purchase? If they could see the impact that either of those, that decision had on nature, and they still make the wrong decision, well, stuff the species. But I actually believe that we do want to make the right decisions. It's the transparency in that decision making that is currently we're not there yet, and we need to get there, and we will. I mean, with European regulation, that is going to make it an enormous difference.
Okay, so we've got 2 minutes, and I want to come to an audience question, but do you want to add something, Danielle, and then I'll come to you, Chris, for a final comment?
We also can't forget the challenge of costs. The brands that are converging towards sustainable solutions can charge a premium because they are starting to use solutions that don't yet have cost parity with existing traditional mechanisms. And so I think a big challenge is, how do we get buy-in from those cheaper brands that have larger access to a massive market? Because that's when we'll see the massive global change. Yeah.
Chris, how are you hearing this? You're at the tech end, but you want to see uptake of the tech so that it's used.
So we're seeing...
And you also say, you made the point before to me, that we're way behind the rest of the world, which really surprises me. In a globalised industry, aren't we part of the rest of the world?
Well, we're seeing more and more companies coming and visiting our facility to understand how we can help them to become greener. And so we would be taking 3, 4, 5 tours a week of our facility. And when I say facility, we have within our university the ability to go from a fibre or even a chemical all the way through to a finished garment, all in the one space. We do utilise places like UTS and also RMIT to help us to construct the garment, but we can melt spin or wet spin the fibre. We can take short staple fibres and put twist in them and make yarns. The reason we have all of this equipment is to enable the knowledge and the technology to be created to enable companies to do that next step. And for us, it's very much about creating that knowledge to enable circularity. Some of it already exists, some of it doesn't. So we're working in that space to create that knowledge. And an example that I've got 3 PhD students working on composting at the moment. And the reason they're working on composting is there's a lot of interest out there. Can I compost my textile? It's 100% cotton. It should be able to be put in the compost bin. But what about the dyes and the finishes that are on there? And so we're actually physically seeing it with their work. Rangi showed me one of her pieces of work the other day, and we're seeing particular dyes that slow down the rate of composting or totally stop the rate of composting.
Wow.
That's interesting, because Cotton Australia did some tests and they said that the dyes were accelerating the rate of composting.
Lisa wants to get in too. They're all desperate, champing at the bit to say their final piece.
I've been lucky enough to come and see Chris's facilities. It's incredible. Which just reminded me, though, a key part that we are missing here in Australia is we can't actually close the loop ourselves right now if we're talking about creating garments. This is a really key problem to the circularity solution. We can grow the cotton, we can create the wool, we cannot process it at scale. We can't, which means we can't gin the cotton, spin the cotton, weave the cotton at scale in Australia. So we can't. So we need to be able to, like, the catchphrase that people say is, like, we need to actually be able to manufacture clothes here before we're going to be able to remanufacture clothes here.
And that's where that's about challenging the nature of this industry and the way it operates globally.
So with cotton spinning, the one missing link is the spinning. So we can weave at reasonable scale. There is companies that do weaving. There is companies that do coloration and dyeing. There is companies that do ginning of cotton. We just can't spin it in Australia. The only spinning facility in the whole of Australia is in my laboratory. And we can spin at 3 kilograms an hour. So there needs to be that next level so that we can do that at that next scale.
So what can people in the room do if they want to see this happen? Any thoughts? Briefly. Actually, let's come to a question. I'll come to you. So we've got, I'll take a couple in a row, actually, and then we might do a little grab bag of answers.
Fantastic discussion. Thank you so much. My question is just kind of looking very broadly. Is there much going on with, instead of looking at textiles being recycled in fashion and as textiles, garments again, using the dead clothes and doing something else with it, like building materials or something?
Great
Is there
question.
much in Australia happening?
Before you answer, just I'm going to grab a few in a row, because we have to wrap. Thank you.
So seeing that the fast fashion industry, there's a lot of, this is in trend and that goes out of style and this is quick. And is there sort of something we can do to slow that down.
Yeah.
But also, I forgot the second part of my question. So.
That's a great question, though. But I love that question, and I'm going to grab these two people who have got their hands keenly up. Thank you.
I'm a health scientist myself, so my question is more related to human health. On microplastic front, which we haven't really talked about, when we talk about polyester. So a lot of our clothing that are spandex or mix or blend, when you wash them, all these are basically just go into our wastewater. You can have a capture in your washing machine to capture most of them, but how many people would do that, right? Yeah. So PFAS is an up and coming factor, and people know about it. It's impact human health. So on that front, is there any innovations or thoughts on that? And how we can also use that on the front to influence government policy, because obviously it's impacting human health in terms of fertility and all fronts.
Thank you for raising that. That's great. Thank you. And one final question. Sorry.
Hi, so I just came in because I'm going to the next lecture, but I just heard cotton.
Thanks.
And I just had to ask, sorry, I just had lunch.
Quick question.
The question is cotton. What about hemp? Because cotton uses huge amounts of water. It actually is very bad for the Australian environment. And hemp is very efficient, very strong, and it's hasn't got any active ingredients.
Thank you. That's a great question, and I'm just going to we won't answer all these, I promise, Robin. We've got one just here. There was one just here. On mic.
Okay. Oh, thanks. Just briefly. Government. Local governments, get them involved. We have all this information on health. Well, talk about this on their websites, put money into that, and maybe even a levy for all the population of Australia of recycling your clothing. We've got no big recycling plants in Australia. We've got this huge land. We could have people going in and out on 2-week cycles.
This is where we're really behind Europe. Thank you so much. Who would like to answer what? We've got hemp, we've got slowing down fast fashion and the fashion trends, and we've got textiles. Can we use them for, say, building materials and other uses? We've also got the health impacts of polymer-based textiles.
I'll just on two fronts. One is I did set up the Future from Waste lab in Melbourne, which took discarded denim that had been thrown away and washed it, cut it open, put the pattern pieces, which fashion is all made out of pattern pieces, onto the denim, and then made it, and Lenny's done a project on it too, and made it into garments. And so every single garment was unique, and it did incredibly well. And again, consumer loved it because she felt like she was buying into something that was completely different to the next one, even if it was the same size. So from a consumer love point of view, it works. Okay, from a scale, and we did a story with US Vogue Business, and they were like, "Is it scalable? Is it scalable?" And I said, the largest part of the laborious part of it is the cutting, but everything else, 100%, it is scalable, and material is local waste. Very little water used, no dyes used, no land used, and then the cutting process is most laborious, and the make is the same. So that is one solution that 100% exists, and it's definitely starting to happen more overseas. LV Denim in London is doing it now. The other one is hemp. Hemp is amazing, and I'm sure I'm not you've probably got more to say about hemp, but I'm a big fan of hemp, and 100% I say hemp is future because it uses very little water, it binds the soil when it grows, it regenerates the soil, it grows very quickly, so very little land is needed to turn it, and very little energy is needed to convert it into fibre, and the parts that aren't needed can be used to make many other things as well. Yeah. So it's a brilliant fibre. Support hemp, buy hemp.
So hemp's been ticking away in the back of my brain in this conversation. Why don't we talk more about hemp, and why can't more funky things be made out of hemp? Any of the other questions? Just briefly, keep it really brief because we've got to wrap.
Yes, textiles are being used in building materials and in furniture, and they're being used really interesting. The piece we're missing is textile to textile, which is what we've kind of been talking about. Consumer things, we're doing a really fabulous research project right now with The Volt, which is a rental company, and it's peer-to-peer, meaning you're renting your clothes to this person, vice versa. We'll be releasing the LCA in about a month. We just got that back. But the beautiful thing about rental is you can keep the fun of fashion. You can still love it and change your look, but you're not buying something new. You're sharing it with your peers. Microplastics, so much potential for change. I think who's on, maybe you'll speak more to this, but I think this is why we're looking at the solutions beyond polyester, because it's so dangerous.
So I'll really quickly, PFOS chemistry is pretty much banned in textiles from January this year. So PFOS is out. Hemp is a wonderful alternative. However, the hemp fibre is in the bark of the plant. You've got to extract it from the bark of the plant to be able to use it. And at the moment, a lot of the hemp that's being extracted in that way is being extracted with really, really serious chemical processes that need to be better. So there's still a lot of work that has to happen in that space. When we look at building products, yes, you can make building products from textiles, but that's downcycling. We don't want to downcycle, we want to recycle. So yes, some will go into building products, but only when we can't put it back into a garment again. Because if we put it into a building product or stuffing in a chair, we're lowering the value of that product. If we can put it back into a garment, we're keeping the value of that product. So it's really, really important to recycle, and then if you can't, downcycle.
I think we've answered all your questions for now. What an incredible panel of experts. I really feel privileged to have heard from you all today, and thank you for the incredible work and leadership in this industry.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you enjoyed this episode of Ocean Ideas. Please make sure to share it with your networks and help us in our mission to turn ripples of action into waves of change for our blue planet.